Hello, good evening. Welcome again to another special installment of Book Passages Conversations with Authors. This time in honor of Women's History Month. I'm your host, Paula Farmer. For Women's History Month, Book Passage is uplifting women's issues and authors with specially curated events. One such event is happening right now. You came to the right place, and it's featuring a conversation around women in the workplace and progressing, thriving in spaces often dominated by men. A decade ago, top career coach and HR consultant Laurie Ruettimann was uninspired, blaming others and herself for the unhappiness she felt, until she had an epiphany. If she wanted a fulfilling existence, she couldn't sit around and wait for change. She had to be her own leader. Betting on You shares Ruettimann's professional journey while sharing insights for the rest of us. She does this through tactical advice on how to approach work in a smart and healthy manner, which includes knowing when to sign off for the day and turn into book passage events just like this. Betting on You is a game-changing must-read for how to radically improve your day-to-day working more effectively and enthusiastically, starting now. Besides being someone I had the honor of meeting and interviewing last year and being completely inspired by her, Laurie is a former HR leader turned writer and a speaker. CNN recognized her as one of the top 5 career advisors in the United States, and her work has been featured on NPR, The New Yorker, USA Today, and the Wall Street Journal and Vox. She hosts the popular podcast, Punk Rock HR. I'm so glad she has a personal connection to her conversation partner and was able to make it happen. I'm sure this is going to be not only a practical, but a magical pairing and discussion. Minda Harts is the CEO of The Memo LLC, a career development platform for women of color, a professor of public service at NYU Wagner, and author of The Memo. In 2020, she was named a LinkedIn Top Voice, and prior to that, she was named one of the 25 emerging innovators by American Express. She too has a podcast. It's called Secure the Seat. And with that, I'm going to leave it in Minda's very capable hands. Take it away.
Thank you so much, Paula. Such a pleasure to be here. Hey, Laurie, how are you?
Minda, I am thrilled to be here, thrilled to see you. It's always a pleasure to hang out on a random Wednesday night. I love it.
There's no other place I'd rather be than be here.
It's so great. It's so great to see you. Thanks for doing this.
My pleasure. I got my book. I hope everybody has theirs. If you don't, Book Passage will make sure that you can get that and click the link. But Laurie, before we jump into what I know will be an amazing conversation, why don't you tell everybody just a little bit about the book, give them that cliff notes, just to give them that sample so that they can go ahead and get it for themselves.
Sure. Thanks, Minda. Well, many years ago, I was an unhappy human resources lady. That's how I identify myself. That was the way I went through the world. And I just had this moment where I thought, there is no way I can do this for another day. And it was this kind of moment that was all consuming, overwhelming, the kind that just takes your breath away. And I thought, there's got to be another way. This is it for me. And so I took a moment. I took a pause and I decided to rewrite the playbook of my own life. And I focused on 4 different kind of quadrants to really rethink my world. And those quadrants were focused on self-leadership, which is the art and science of individual accountability. I just basically took charge of my life. And I thought, you know what, there are a lot of reasons why things are happening, but I'm going to look internally. I'm going to fix work and fix my world by fixing myself first. The second thing I focused on was well-being, physical, emotional, and financial, because nobody ever took over the world on 4 hours of sleep and eating Starburst and drinking Pepsi for dinner. The third thing I focused on was learning, like continuous learning is where it's at for me, because if you're not learning, you're not growing. If you're not growing, you're not thriving. And what's the point of life? And at that moment, when I had that like miniature breakdown, my brain was tired. I was exhausted. So I committed myself to learning. And then the fourth and final thing I talk about in the book is really risk taking. How do all of these amazing and terrible people put themselves first, right? Why is, every horrible celebrity out there winning at the game and I'm slugging along having a terrible life? I just couldn't figure it out until I discovered this idea called the PreMortem, which I teach in the book. So those four things are really the infrastructure, the skeleton of betting on you. And I just tell stories, embarrassing, cringeworthy, hopefully funny and entertaining stories. But Minda, I'm so proud of this book because I wrote a business book and a career book with no quadrants and no bullet points. So that's an accomplishment for me. And if anything, I can go to my grave knowing that I didn't contribute to the traditional business book format. So I'm thrilled about that.
Listen, I'm thrilled too, because I appreciated when I read your book, not having that in there. So thank you for it. So thank you for disrupting business books. I appreciate you, Laurie.
Just trying something new, Minda, right?
It makes me think about a word that you used when you were describing, some of the tenets of your book, well-being. Why does elevating and prioritizing individual well-being make women better at work, and really anyone, I would imagine?
Yeah. Well, so often we are told that our work is our worth. And we identify ourselves by our job titles, by our proximity to power. And for many reasons, this has happened. I mean, this is not like knocking anybody, off the shelf with this amazing revelation that we think our work is our worth. But for me, when we recognize that our work is not our worth, we can reconnect to our bodies, to our spirits, to our souls, and start to shore up a life that we want to live. We've only been given one body. We've only been given one brain and one soul. And so many of us go through this world on autopilot and give it all to our employers, who would replace us with an algorithm in a heartbeat if they could. And so for me, starting with well-being meant really trying to figure out, how does my body want to operate in this world? How does my soul want to connect with other souls? Do I want to go through the world tired? Do I want to go through the world cranky? Or do I want to be of service? And so focusing on my physical well-being, making sure I fuel myself to do the things I want to do was really important. And I think this is so important for Minda women. And you tell me, I work with so many women who are like, Laurie, I'm so busy, I didn't have any time to pee today. And like, you literally work from home. Your bathroom is 5 feet away from you. If you need to pee, you should pee. So it starts with really being that self-leader and saying, I'm worth having breakfast. I am worth going to the bathroom. I am worth exercising in whatever capacity I want to do that. Not because somebody told me to run a 5K, but my body is worth investing in. And when you invest in yourself, like a company, like an organization, there are positive downstream effects in all aspects of your life, including work. So I don't know, Minda, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I agree with you. And it's funny that you mentioned the bathroom thing, because you'd be surprised how many people tell me, I don't even have time to go to the bathroom. And I'm thinking the same thing it's right. You might even turn your head and look at the depending on where you sit, right? And you can't make that space. And I think stuff like that, I know we're going to talk about burnout, but I'm curious, what do you think gets in the way from people feeling like they can't prioritize something like going to the restroom, Laurie?
Well, I think there's institutional issues as to why we think we have to put companies first, why we think we have to put our jobs first. But, there could be trauma, right? There could be this idea that we're not worthy and everything else comes first. But I also just think there's habit. And for many years, I thought what I had to do was show up, and I did actually have to show up and give 110% in really weird and unhealthy and traumatic ways, just to keep up with people who had unfair advantages within the organization. And I didn't allow myself to even imagine a world where I thought, you know what? Maybe I could take a Friday off, or maybe I could say no instead of saying yes. So it just becomes like this default way of operating in the world. And I would like to say that there's a book or a pill or a diet or a experience that you can have that can disrupt it and you can start to prioritize yourself. I would like to say that Right Within or Betting on You or You Are More Than Magic could do it, but really it's about you meeting the moment and finally saying enough is enough. And I think, Minda, why I do my work and why you do your work is to show that that moment can happen, and it can happen sooner than people think. So I don't know, do you have any reflections on why people can't go to the bathroom, can't put themselves first? How does that happen?
Yeah, I think you nailed it. And I think it's really important that we prioritize what good looks like to us, right? Like I want to be able to work for an employer that allows me to, turn my camera off and go to the restroom or whatever I need to do, right? In that way, because if we were back in the office, oftentimes people do get up from the meeting, right? And they go to the restroom or they do those sorts of things. But somehow, being on the screen or the Zoom, we feel like we can't step away and do those things. And I think we have to just redefine what success and well-being looks like for us, not at the expense of our own well-being.
In the book, I tell a story about, this elder millennial who's high performing, had this amazing career, was a college athlete, went to work in corporate America, rose up the ranks in her marketing department and became a very young CMO at a very impressive organization. And all she did was get calls from people in the evening to solve their problems on her team. And I told her this story that I had heard from Sarah Blakely, the founder of Spanx, who once had people coming to her all the time and asking her, Sarah, how should we do this? Sarah, how should we do that? And finally, Sarah broke and she's like, what's wrong with my leadership style? Let me communicate something to you. I want you to do your job as if I weren't here. And immediately she could see people take a breath, to step back and say, oh yeah, all right, I get it. And so when I worked with this woman, we talked about really communicating to your team that they're empowered to do the work that you hired them to do, that you trust them, that you believe in them, that they don't have to call you at 7:30 at night to ask for permission. Because sometimes, Minda, as leaders, we invite the chaos into our own lives. We create it. So it's about setting boundaries, not only up with your, leadership team, but also with your peers, and also setting boundaries with people who report into you and saying, I believe in you. I don't need to micromanage you. And nobody ever gets fired for taking a risk with good intention. Nobody ever gets fired for doing their job well. Nobody gets fired for making that honest mistake. The people who get fired are the people who took shortcuts or who thought they were better than the system, or there are a million reasons, but nobody gets fired for taking a swing out of a good place. So, I can go on for hours about this, but I really feel as if sometimes we invite that chaos into our lives. And if we want better well-being, if we want better work-life balance, we want all of those things, Minda, it starts with us.
Absolutely. And you mentioned my current book, Right Within, is the reason why I wrote it, because there's all these systems taking place, but ultimately we can decide how our well-being, right? It's hard, our well-being for a reason, and we can take ownership of that. And that's why I love Betting on You.
Well, Minda, one of the things that has really moved me about Right Within and many of, just your writing in general, is that you talk about being complicit. And so can you talk a little bit about that? Because that moves me every time you discuss that, just that feeling, that word, and your role in that. So tell us a little bit about that.
Oh, well, thank you for that. When I was in, and we're going to talk about this next, I have to talk to you about burnout, but when I was in a very toxic environment, I realized that I wasn't establishing boundaries. And you were talking about that. And I was walking on eggshells, all of these different things. But because I wasn't creating boundaries, I was participating in my own oppression, right? And I think like the people who are like almost about to like pee on themselves, or, they're like shaking so bad that they haven't eaten all day. It's
That's
like, okay,
right.
wait a second. That's not Bob's fault necessarily, right?
There's plenty wrong with Bob. Yeah.
Particular part of it, right? That's not Chrissy's. I'm sure Chrissy's eating her bagel if she needs to, right? Like if you need something, what are you doing? What part of the situation can you control? Yes. And I had to start to look at my own part in all of it.
Well, it's very daunting to say, I have some responsibility in this because there are systems, there are people, there are places where you work that are out to get you and are toxic. That is legitimate. But there's also the question of how long are you going to go through this? How long are you going to endure this? And especially now in this market, with the tide changing the way it is, with the opportunity that's emerging for the entrepreneurial side that you could be exploring, for all the different things that you could be doing in this world, to suffer another day without a plan, there's no reason. There's no reason. So as much as I'm out there to coach people up, Minda, you're out there to coach people up, all we can do is hope that people meet this moment and really realize that their work is not their worth. And, so many people say this, just by being born, you are worthy of love and affection and education and companionship and food and sustenance. And it doesn't matter where you fall on an org chart. So if you believe this in your heart and your soul, you operate within the world of work totally differently. And that is what my book was trying to communicate.
Yes. And if you aren't already convinced in our 15 so minute of conversation, get the book, make sure you buy it. We need these reminders. Sometimes we're not affirmed in our workplaces and we have to do it ourselves. So make sure that you get Laurie's book. And I want to dig in a little bit because I think some of it, because we aren't establishing boundaries and because of the system, we do experience burnout. How can women avoid burnout during this stressful time through professional detachment?
Well, Minda, if I really truly had the answer, I would be a billionaire and you and I would be in the Maldives right now. So I'm just saying that we'd have our own, yacht. We would be oligarchs in our own way. So I want that answer. But I believe in this idea called professional detachment. And it is a thing that is taught at the CIA. It's taught at the FBI. It's taught all over the world, where you truly treat your workplace like they are your very favorite and best client. And that means that that person in accounting who seems like your friend, they're nice, you can be friendly, but they're not your friend. So you're automatically setting up boundaries so that when your client, not your boss, your very favorite client, asks you to work over the weekend, you make a business decision and not an emotional decision. You can look at this in a logical, rational way and start to do the math, the risk assessment. What's the real cost benefit of working over the weekend and what's the risk of saying no? You can start to make that chart. And I know we're going to talk about risk later on. You can start to figure out, am I going to get fired if I say no, or is this really no big deal? Because you have some distance. And I think it took me a long time to realize, even though I know it, right, that work isn't my family. That work isn't a place I go for fulfillment. Although I believe in working at the intersection of purpose and meaning, work is just one physical location where I do that. My whole life should be about purpose and meaning, not just that thing I do from 9 to 5. So when you treat your boss like a client, when you treat your colleagues like a client, when they piss you off, it becomes a little bit easier to be emotionally regulated and figure out what to do next. So professional detachment, Minda, it's the thing that saves my ass to this day, because there are moments where I'm like, this person is attacking me. I'm like, wait, no, they're not my sister. They're not my aunt who has known me for 45 years. They're not any of this. They're just someone in my professional space. And most likely they're just projecting. So yeah, professional detachment. It'll save your soul. I like to call it being a slacker. A lot of people hate that. Also, that's a privilege statement, and I recognize that. But it's about recognizing that work is work, and I'm going to give 100%, but then I'm going to stop, and I'm going to have a life outside of work. So I don't know, Minda, a lot of people hate that word slacker. What do you think of it?
Well, when you used it, I was actually I was thinking two things, because when you were talking about professional detachment, and also I've read the book, and I thought, I wish that I would have had that language back in the day when I wanted to leave my workplace, but I was like, oh, but my manager, he's going to be so heartbroken and blah, blah, blah.
That's a lie. That's a lie right there.
Oh my God, I wish I would have had that. But when you said slacker, I'm curious. I don't even know how to, you would probably do it more justice, but how does being a slacker work exactly? And how is it weaponized against some women in that way? So how do we become better slackers Laurie?
Well, slackers are professionally detached. They're like, work is work, my life is my life, and never the two shall meet. And I mean, that's a little extreme, right? And I think of people like Bart Simpson and Ferris Bueller, right? Because I'm of a certain age, right? Those were slackers. But for me, the modern slacker, and this is something that's recently been written about in Business Insider and New York Times, is someone who really understands the system is not made for me. The system is made for those rich oligarchs. It's made for people to benefit from my labor. So I have integrity. I'm going to do my job, but I recognize that doing 110% is not going to be rewarded any differently than doing 89%. So I'm going to maybe do 89% when I need to do it, right? So there's like this personal calculation. On the other hand, there are some people who give 110%, Minda, as you write about, as we've both written about, and are never recognized for it, right? In marginalized communities, in communities that have been traditionally oppressed or ignored. So they don't necessarily have the luxury of being a slacker. But I would say if a system doesn't recognize you and is never going to reward you, it's time to start rethinking your relationship with that system. And Minda, that's your work right there.
Whew, that is such a word. And I'm glad that I know, because some people probably heard the word slacker and they're like, what is she what are they talking about?
I still want to make a shirt that says slacker, and give them out. And because why not redefine that word or add some nuance? I think one of the really sad things is that we've lost nuance in this world of career language, right? It's very binary. You're either in or out. You're either hustling your face off or, you're completely opting out and you're part of the great resignation. And in truth, most of us are workers. We're going to work until the day we die in some capacity, right? We're always going to be of service. And we're in this murky middle where we just want to really do a good job and be helpful. But, we want to go on vacation at some time. We want to have a good life with our families. We want to have families, right? This is important for a lot of people. And I think we deserve it. And I think anything I can do, even if I redefine the word slacker, I'm going to try to do that to fix work. So.
I love it so much. Yes. When you get those shirts made, let me know so I can send you a Cash App or Venmo sale.
Get one for free,
Thank you. I'm trying to figure that out. I know many of you are watching. I know you're enjoying the conversation. If you have any questions, start to put them in the chat so that Laurie we can get to them in the conversation toward the end. But we want to make sure we get to as many as possible. So now is the time. If you're thinking about some things, pop it in the chat. We want to hear from you. But, you touched on something about being a slacker, professional detachment. And I'm curious because many of us, like you said, will be working well into our seasoned life. But yes. I think this is really important to know is why is it that work will never make you rich? And what should you do about that? Because I think we need to level set here, right? Some people are working so freaking hard, but that. Yeah, I'll just let you answer that question.
Well, Minda, I mean, work can make you rich. Work can absolutely make you wealthy. But working a 9-to-5 corporate job, like so many people who have read my book and read your books, the system's not designed to make you wealthy. The system is designed to make you work at a number that you're happy with, the highest number that you can get to, but the lowest number that the company will pay, right? There's a negotiation there. Even when they say there's not, there's this murky middle negotiation, and it's designed so that you stay and you contribute as much as you can at that price point with 3 to 5% merit increases on an annual basis, right? This system is not meant for you to be innovative. It's not meant for you to be the next Jeff Bezos. And there are people out there who think, if but for me, don't tax the wealthy because that could be me one day. That's probably not going to be you. So if you recognize that you're not going to be Jeff Bezos or, Steve Jobs reincarnated from your job, it gives you a little bit more of an emotionally regulated position to say, is this worth it? I'm working my heart and soul out and I can barely make rent. I'm working my heart and soul out and I've got a 2010 Subaru Outback with 160,000 miles, right? I mean, these are the things that people come to me. I'm working my heart and soul out and I have $115,000 in student debt and I make $48,000 a year. And my boss is a pain in my ass and doesn't respect my work. That math does not add up. And so if we recognize that the jobs we are in are not designed to make us Jeff Bezos and we want to get there, then we need to plan our lives differently. Or if we're fine living these great, important middle-class lives, right, where we have families, we're in our communities, then we don't prioritize work as much. But Minda, we never have this conversation about how work isn't designed to make us rich. And in the book, I write about the COO who was lecturing me about how I needed to learn how to budget. So the assumption was that I was not financially well off because of my exorbitant spending. You know, they were lecturing young people about avocado toast before millennials were even in the workforce, right? So there's this assumption that if you're poor, it's your own fault and not because of the system. And we need a real conversation about compensation in this country.
Absolutely, absolutely. I have to read this from the chat. Hey, Joey Price says, I heard a quote once, your boss will never pay you well enough to live in their neighborhood.
100%, 100%.
Absolutely. So I think that that's very important. Thank you, Laurie, for talking about that.
Laurie, that's great.
Something that you mentioned earlier was about the PreMortem. And can we talk a little bit about what is it and how do you use it to predict career failure and fix it? Because I think that's also a piece of this career puzzle, right?
Well, Minda, for years, I would go on interviews and screw them up, right? Or maybe get the job and, I was so excited, I'm going to start this new job. And I would go and it was the same old damn job. Maybe I just earned 10% more or got a different title, right? And that's kind of what's happening to people right now, this great talent swap, where we're swapping people out, everybody's changing, but nobody's any happier. Corporate profits are at a 100-year high and happiness is at a 50-year low, right? You know, nothing is any different, but yet there's a lot of movement in the market allegedly. So I stumbled on this thing called the PreMortem that companies use, and it's based on this old Stoic idea that you try to predict failure before it happens. And IBM uses it, Cisco uses it, NASA uses it. And all they do is they think about something that will fail, like a job interview or a compensation negotiation. And it's not might fail, not could fail. The language is so important. This is something you know will fail. You've screwed it up in the past. Could be a kitchen remodel, right? It could be a trip that you're going to take with your family, a holiday festivity. How will that fail? And you just set a timer for a minute or two because you don't want to spiral. You want a container, and you write down all the ways this thing is going to fail. And when the timer goes up, you look at that list and you fix your shit. I mean, that's it. But you fix it before you do the thing you want to do. And if you fix your stuff, if you read this roadmap, this gift that you've given yourself, that you've been given from on high, really, of the ways that you're going to fail, you give yourself a 30% greater chance of success, all by exploring failure. So, Minda, that's a competitive advantage you can't look away from. So before you have a crucial conversation with someone, ask yourself, how is that going to fail? Before you ask for a raise on a random Tuesday to an HR person who's walking out the door, ask yourself, how is that going to fail? Or even before you interview, how will that fail? You know, maybe you're not great at Zoom interviews. Maybe you can't tell a story. Maybe you're sweaty like I am, or whatever. Like there are a million reasons why things fail. Fix the things that you always mess up, so at least you can fail in new and more interesting ways. That is the core of the PreMortem. And it's something NASA does now. Before they send a space shuttle up, they ask, how are we going to kill these people? And believe it or not, they never used to ask that question. I mean, it is just amazing. So if it's good enough for NASA, I think it's good enough for everybody out there who has an important project at work. You know, Minda, I wish I would have had this years ago when I worked in HR, because every year during open enrollment, where people sign up for benefits, there was always like Scotty in logistics who didn't get the email and would come to me the day after everything is knitted up and be like, I want to change my benefits. And it's like, screw you, Scotty. But really, it was my own fault. I knew this dude. I knew he was going to mess it up. Why didn't I just go to Scotty and save myself the heartache, right? That's the beauty of the PreMortem. So,
listen, if you want to learn more about it, make sure you get. Definitely need that.
I don't trash talk Scotty too much in the book. I changed his name.
Well, yes, but about how you can use PreMortem, which as I'm listening to you talk about how it can predict that kind of failure. How can we use PreMortem to pressure test against imposter syndrome? Because I know that that's something that, I mean, I think a lot of people experience, but I know that women talk about it a little bit more out loud than maybe men do. So I would love to hear your thoughts there.
Well, Minda, before we do that, you have to tell everybody what you think about imposter syndrome, because for years we went around like imposter syndrome was some like psychological condition that just befalls women, right? So tell me what you think about imposter syndrome.
You know, Laurie, I actually see imposter syndrome as gaslighting yourself, right? Because we often talk about people gaslighting other people, but when we are talking against ourselves, when we're negative self-talking, when we say that, oh, I don't know why they chose us, why am I here, all that negative self-talk, that is gaslighting yourself. You are more than enough, right? And so I do believe that, just as we've been talking about through this conversation, a lot of these things are unlearning unhealthy patterns, right? So I look at imposter syndrome in a way of, I don't want to date you anymore. I need to ghost you, okay? Out of my life, get out of here. We can't be successful. If I'm trying to get ahead and become rich or wealthy or, you know, detached, imposter syndrome is not going to help me get there. So I got to break up with imposter syndrome. So we all need to be trying to break up and find new booze, replacing them with other things. And so, and with positive self-talk. But, you know, I'd love to hear your thoughts on how, when we are still dating, entangled with imposter syndrome, how can we use PreMortem?
Well, you know, I feel as if this thing that we call imposter syndrome, you're right, is something that comes from us and our negative self-talk. It's also years of being Black or brown or female or trans or gay, right? There are all these messages out there that you're not worthy, you're not good enough. And it keeps other people at a competitive advantage. So I just want to put that out there, right? I mean, it's so important to know people are making money off your imposter syndrome. So if there's any reason to quit imposter syndrome, it's because it gives you a raise financially. So that's first and foremost. I think one of the things that I did when I was feeling imposter syndrome back in the day when I worked in human resources is I just asked myself, is this really true? Am I really terrible? Do I really not deserve to be here? What if I tried? Like, what's the worst that's going to happen if I tried? And believe me, I could imagine a lot of terrible things about going out on my own, writing a book, being a speaker. And many of those things did indeed come true, but at least I was prepared for it, right? At least I went and built that list and I could face it head on and make a plan. So when I realized I could no longer work in human resources, and I'm like, well, maybe I'll be a writer. What's the worst that can happen? Well, I might screw up my finances. You know what I did? I went out and I talked to a financial advisor, right? And I really understood just how much money is it going to take for me to be a writer. I don't have that kind of money. All right, maybe I should save up. And so that's what I did. And I also negotiated a severance out of my final organization, which I write about in my book in chapter 8. And I teach other people how to negotiate a severance on the way out the door. So I think if you do this list, if you are undaunted, if you just really look at the worst fears that you have, you recognize you can build a plan to get around those fears. So if you think you suck, you think you're terrible, journal it, write it down, face it, and then start to build a plan to, as my friend Joe Biden says, build back better. You know, that's what this is all about.
Absolutely, build back better. And we have to build back that mental hygiene. And to your point, Laurie, yes, there's systems in place that will have us questioning ourselves. So we definitely don't want to participate in that same system and bring ourselves down. So thank you for that. And in a word you mentioned in your last statement was HR. And I know that may be triggering for some people, but I'm curious, when you say in your book in chapter 6, to be precise, you say that women need to be their own HR. What do you mean by that?
Well, Minda, I think we've made it pretty clear that corporations don't have your back, right? And so for me, when I was working in human resources, I was amazed at how many people walked into my office and asked me to solve their problems. Because when you walk into HR's office and you say, I need your help, there's automatically a judgment, even if they are well-intentioned HR professionals. You're automatically labeled as someone who can't handle stuff. And so if you can't handle it, that's really important to go see your HR professional to get it on lockdown and to make sure you have their help. But if it's something like, I don't like the look of this person, I'm not getting, I can't figure out how to formulate a healthy compromise or a productive solution. That's some low level problem solving that you should probably work on in your own life. And so in the book, I write about that, how people would come into my office and expect me to, honest to God, look up the bus schedule for them. I'm like, how did I get to work today? Why can't you get to work today? Like you're a grown ass person. And by the way, you make more money than I do. I mean, it was really amazing. So being your own HR, especially when you're a woman, means that you don't rely on anybody to have your back. And it's a sad fact, but these organizations have proven to us time and time again, they don't have our backs. And so if we want to truly be the CEOs of our own lives, which we should all strive to be, it starts with really taking accountability. And I know it's a terrible message. In a dream world, HR is your advocate. They are your union stewards. They have your back. They're your friends. But in reality, HR is this mitigating factor between the workforce and leadership to make sure you don't sue the company. That's it. That's what HR does at its core. So don't get mad about it. Problem solve around it, strategize around it, and make sure you don't put yourself in a situation where you're caught up in a system you can't control. Work real hard to be your own HR. So that means onboarding yourself with integrity. Don't wait for someone to introduce you to the team. Get a little proactive, get curious. Ask your boss, can I reach out to people on LinkedIn before I start? Ask proactively, what is my onboarding practice? Like, what should I expect on day one? When you get there, ask for rules of the road, like find someone to be your guide. Say, all right, how am I going to piss people off? Like, what do I need to know and who do I need to avoid? You can ask those questions. And if you do, your own employee experience is so much better. So that's what I mean.
I love that so much. And we can take control by betting on ourselves about what that looks like in our experience is. Again, if you have questions, make sure you get them in the chat because pretty soon we'll start going to questions. But, I know that some of us may have jobs that neither we like, or maybe we're struggling right now, but I'm curious, how does getting a mentor make a terrible job better or learning something new?
Well, either one is a great place to start. Harvard Business Review did some awesome research around people who are learning. And when they're learning and growing and thriving, they tend to be more ethical in the workplace and be happier and more engaged just in the world. And so I really believe that all learning is worthwhile because if you're curious, you bring that curiosity back to the workforce. Just today, I was talking to someone, a colleague, who was telling me that he's learning how to make clear ice. I'm like, all right, tell me more. I learned a little bit about him. I learned a little bit about clear ice. I don't know. It was kind of fun and kind of interesting. And I just feel like that's what makes work in relationships so worthwhile. Those quiet moments where you just connect on a human to human level. And, all learning is definitely worthwhile. There's plenty of compliance training that we attend just as employees where you're like, why am I going to this training? It is so boring. But Minda, that's how I learned to be a public speaker. I started watching people who were brought in to deliver sexual harassment training or training in, the plant floor to make sure I didn't get sucked up into an extruder, right? And I'm like, oh, that's terrible. I would say that differently. I would do that differently. And suddenly, before you knew it, I was taking components of that and building it into the way I presented. So there's opportunities to learn even in the most boring rote moments. And that's what can make your job better. But you're right. I think the best thing to do is to get a mentor. And I don't mean like an old school mentor where you go and you get some executive and you sit in their walnut encrusted office, right? And you meet with them 3 times a year. Like if you like somebody online, go stalk them, go watch them, go steal their good stuff. And then, you know what, be a good person and introduce yourself. And if they never respond, cool. It's benign neglect. Like who cares? But if they do respond, that's amazing. And, I actually try to live that. For years, I followed a woman by the name of Susie Welch. She's a journalist, was part of the Harvard Business Review, was married to Jack Welch, the former CEO of GE. And I just reached out to her. In fact, right before I turned in my final draft of the book, and I'm like, Susie, I love you. Been following you for years. I consider you to be a mentor. I want to write about that in my book. And I just wanted to make sure that's cool. And not only was it cool, she wrote back and she said, I'm happy to endorse your book. I was so blown away. You never know what's going to happen. I never thought I would be connected to Susie Welch. So I don't know, like a mentor, even in an informal, real casual way can be game changing. So I just hope other people take that risk and reach out. Minda, they can reach out to you. They can reach out to me. We can connect them with cool people, like whatever they need. But it's about asking for what you need so that you can bet on yourself and live a great life.
Yes. And, I love that story a lot, Laurie. And when we bet, I know when I betted on myself, I've never regretted it. And so I hope people will at least consider what it could look like to bet on themselves. We have some great questions coming in. I'm just going to give the audience a little more time to get a few more in, but I wanted to ask you, what's one piece of advice that you have for working women in 2022?
Well, I think so often we look elsewhere to fix work. We are all talking as working women about how terrible the workplace is. How many of us have opted out for childcare issues, for work-life balance issues, for mental health issues. And we keep looking around for other people to solve our problems. And I'm just going to say, we fix work by fixing ourselves first. So if there is something you need therapy, you need to go to the doctor, you need, to get better sleep, go and take it. There is no time like the present to start doing this for yourself, because you're not going to fix work by going to yet another lunch and learn. You're not going to fix work by complaining to your HR department. You're going to fix work by being rested, by being emotionally regulated, by learning something new and being engaged in the world, by taking smarter risks, and by being fully accountable for your experiences, good and bad. That's how we fix work. There's this old, Buddhist trope out there that you can't go out and change the world. You don't convert the world. You spread the good seeds of Buddhism by meditating and focusing on yourself and what you can do. And in that way, that's so inspiring to me. I mean, I'm not converting to Buddhism tomorrow, but it's absolutely true. We impact the world by working on ourselves first. And that's what I want working women to know, that they can do it. They were waiting for permission. They got it. It's tonight. Like, start now. Just do one thing to move the needle forward.
And that is your homework. Two things: betting on you, but then also, what are you going to do to give yourself permission? That one thing. I know it takes courage, but definitely I hope you do that for yourself. And I'm not a Buddhist either, but I know that I do read a lot about Buddhism often. And they also say that you can have the power to heal yourself. And I think part of this, right, is rechanging how we're thinking about things, unlearning some stuff. So I'm glad that you mentioned that. But I also want to, we have some questions here, Laurie. Are we ready to jump in?
I think so. But Minda, before we take questions, I wanted to say thank you for tonight. And I also want to give everybody an opportunity to hear a little bit about your good stuff, because you got a new book that's coming out like right around the corner. So we've been talking a lot about betting on you, but I want people to pre-order that book. So tell us all what's coming up.
Well, thank you so much. Very Short is my third book. It's my first young adult book. It's called You Are More Than Magic, The Black and Brown Girl's Guide to Finding Your Voice, with Penguin Teen. It's out April 5th. It's available wherever you like to buy your books. And I'm just so excited. It's a love letter to young Black and brown girls about how to find their voice. And then it's also a letter to our allies and parents and teachers who aren't of color. How do you role model what good looks like to young, impressionable young girls, right, who have a voice and sometimes are afraid to use it? And so I think it's really important. We talk in the book, I talk about imposter syndrome, where it showed up for me growing up, and how I had to dismantle that and break up with it, but also having those difficult conversations, because we're talking about some of those tonight, Laurie. Like, I know I didn't learn how to create boundaries till well into my adulthood, but I wish I would have learned that at 15, at 14. And so I invite everyone to buy this book for anyone, if you're a teacher, educator, call your local library. But ultimately, if you do have kids who aren't young Black and brown girls, how are they showing up in class with their counterparts, right? And so learning and reading about those things, we want allyship in action for everyone. And so I hope that you will all consider or tell somebody about You Are More Than Magic. So thank you.
You're welcome. I'm so excited. I have pre-ordered my copy through Book Passage, and I hope everybody else does as well.
I hope so too. First things first, get it here.
Well, I'm also happy to shout out libraries. Libraries are also very good. So good for you for doing that. So yeah, call your local library. Yes.
Yes. And I did, if you like Audible, I did recently do the recording. So when that comes out, you can get it too. So thank you for that plug. I know I have a good question here. Hey, Mary Faulkner, she has a question. And a great question here. Two-part question. What are the compromises that you see workers making to get by? And secondly, what are some that you've made that you regret? I love that.
Mm-hmm. The number one compromise that people make is with their physical well-being. They sit too long at their desks. They do the long commutes. They're back on the trains already, right? Or they're in the car to the train and then do the bus ride into the office. All of this is starting again. And I'm real worried about it, and I did it to myself for many years. And it came at the expense of my body, my back, my arms, my whole entire being was just sore all the time. I sneezed in an airport and threw out my back at the age of 29. Like, what the hell? But my story is so common. People just sacrifice their bodies for their jobs. And I think, Minda, we didn't survive a pandemic just to go back to 2019. I didn't survive a pandemic to ever, eat some crappy leftover scraps for lunch when I'm truly hungry. I'm going to take care of myself because I know that I was lucky enough to survive this pandemic and I survived it for a reason. And I would invite everybody else to think about that as well.
I love that. As you were talking about that, Laurie, I said, you know what? I didn't get 3 vaccine shots to go back to 2019.
No kidding. Why would anybody do that? And I know people make difficult decisions for their families, for their children. We're talking about working women here, but I also know that your children are watching you. They're watching your choices. I watched my mother. I watched my grandmother. I watched what they did. And while I admire their sacrifices, I know they didn't sacrifice for me to throw out my back at an airport. So that's how I feel about that.
Agreed. Amen to that. We have a great question here by Ariel. If I pronounce it wrong, I apologize. Any special advice for first in the family to go to college women? So first generation college.
Yeah. Minda, I think you're first in family. I'm first in family as well. And one of the things that really broke my heart is that nobody in my family could really coach me and advise me on the process. So I learned everything third hand, fourth hand through scraps of information. I remember going, what's an ACT? And it was like, Laurie, we need to help you. Somebody finally swooped down and said, you need to take your ACT, right? So I think for those of us who are emerging into professional communities, you got to find people just like you. Because it's weird. I went to work at some of America's largest companies and they all assumed that I was a blue blood. They all assumed that I just came from a family of people who went to college and knew how to cut my food and knew what fork to use, right? I don't know any of that shit. And so find your community, find those first in college people, be their friends, laugh with them, cry with them, but get a community going because you're going to need it. I don't know, Minda, how did you deal with all that?
Trial and error. But I think that's where imposter syndrome really started to take hold of me. I didn't have language for it back then, but because I felt like I didn't have the things that everybody else did, that I was like, just happy to be here, grateful to be here. And what I will say, that isn't the posture that you want to take. You're there for a reason. You deserve this role. They hired you for a reason. And so, it's what you do when you sit down, right? And I think it's so important. And I wish that I wish I would have known that and that I didn't sell myself short. And so I think it's a wonderful thing. But what I will say that I wish I would have done is create better boundaries when I first entered the workplace, because I felt inadequate, because I wasn't, some of the pedigree that some of my colleagues, then I shrunk myself. And so the one thing I would say is make sure that you don't keep your head down, make sure it's lifted up and use your voice when you need to.
Love it. Thanks, Minda.
Awesome. Let's see. We have so many great questions coming in here. I don't know if it's Sonia. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing it, but yeah, okay. So. I love this question. What do you do when you happen to find a workplace where you do love the people you work with? How do you create those boundaries? Because you see them like family.
Yeah, well, gently, I think it's really important to recognize that you can certainly be friends with people you work with, but the default isn't that you are friends with the people you work with. And friendship takes time, friendship takes investment. And so if there are people in your workplace that you genuinely enjoy going out with, interacting with, first of all, you can just recognize it as that, name it and say it as that. I enjoy working with these people. I enjoy socializing with them. I am friendly with them without putting on different layers of relationships that may or may not exist. But if you do have a connection with someone, like I'm dear friends with Jennifer McClure, a wonderful woman that I met through work, recognize that that relationship, girlfriend to girlfriend, takes some work. And so for us, we have our work stuff that we talk about, but we are very intentional about not talking about work and talking about families, what's happening in our lives, so that it's not just this ongoing conversation of what's happening in the office. And I think that's where the rubber meets the road. Do you know someone well enough to just truly be there in an intimate moment? Can you talk to them about your 401k balance? Things like that, Can you talk, do they know your mortgage payment? Like real friends know weird, intimate details of one another's lives. And that definitely takes work, and it doesn't often happen in the workplace.
Great answer. Couple more questions we can get to. I see one here from Katie. Thank you. Are we in a better work world for women post-COVID era now that employers realize that we can successfully work remotely or hybrid?
My honest answer, we are not in a better world of work for anybody. Not yet. Got some work to do. I think remote work is actually a little dangerous. And I'm going to interview an expert out of Norway in a couple of weeks on my podcast who talks about how work at home has really reconfigured our relationship with our home environments. And now it's even harder to turn things off because the things we associated with rest and relaxation are now psychologically being associated with work. We have nowhere to go to escape it. And I think as women, that's really dangerous because for many working women, the only place they can truly go is in the shower to get away from everything, right? Their kids, all of it. And I'm a little worried. I'm very, more than a little worried. And Minda, not only that, I mean, there's surveillance that's happening on the workforce in their home. There's, the encroachment of technology. There's just people working more and technically earning less. That happens. So I don't like any of it, but I am optimistic, Minda, because there are great people like you. There are amazing thought leaders out there talking about culture and work. Maybe it'll get better, but I don't know.
Yeah, I'm optimistic too, but I think a lot of women right now are doing a lot of unpaid labor. Like you said, we're working a lot more than
is
we
new. Yeah, I mean,
we already were, but now more so.
And there are all these statistics out there about men being promoted during COVID and men being recognized and men receiving greater raises because they can show up, because the women in these traditional relationships or the caregiver in this relationship sacrifice their own career. And I just, when does this binary way of relationship and work end? I'm not sure, but I know that the people in power benefit from women leaving the workforce in droves, even though they complain that they can't find talent. So until we start to have a more honest and authentic relationship and conversation with power, I don't know what changes.
I wholeheartedly agree. I have a friend named Eve Rodsky, and she wrote this book called Fair Play, and she talks about how men's time is finite and women's time is infinite.
My time's not infinite. I don't think yours is either.
Right. How it's not, but that's what society would make us think, right? Sure. That we could just can do it all. So yes,
that's a great book. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think based off of betting on ourselves, creating boundaries, all the things that Betting on You talks about, I think is important. We have a comment here from McSherry. She says, I'm an international teacher listening to this, and we embrace being inclusive and celebrating every student and adults. Thank you for writing books with topics that we never discussed before. Thank you so much for that.
That's really sweet. Yeah, that's good.
We have time, I think, for one more question before Paula comes up. And this is for both of us, Laurie, but I'll let's see. Where does better access and opportunity for BIPOC women in job search come from? Upper management, HR department, DEI managers. In fact, there are enough BIPOCs in HR. And I know you're HR former HR professional, still moonlighting in that space at times. Right?
I can't quit it. I can't quit it.
Well, I'll let you go for that first.
Again, if I had a really great answer to this question, I would be a multi-billionaire, because this is the problem to solve. You know, how many more African-American women are we going to promote to the head of diversity, right? The head of inclusion, and then wonder why we haven't fixed anything. There are 2 African-American CEO women in the top Fortune 100 or 500. I can't remember the number now, but I mean, you know, you can't just rely on TIAA, CREF, and Boots Walgreens Alliance to break the barriers. So I don't know where it comes from. I'm not quite sure. One of my hopes is that this younger generation of workers is subversive, and they start to get promoted, and they start to make inroads, and they start to read books by Minda, read Betting on You, right? And they've really got a point of view, so that when they do get in positions of power, they can make changes. That's what I'm banking on, that next generation of leaders. Because Minda, I don't know, I think it's too late for this generation.
What I will say amen to that. And I will also say that, again, we have to be very clear. A good friend of mine always says, say what you mean without saying it mean. And I think if we want something, then we definitely have to ask for it. But if you're not getting it from where you sit, then don't be afraid to seek out another table where you are celebrated and not tolerated and not checking a box, right? Because we know what we feel like when we're just somewhere where we're checking a box. And so what I hope happens is that we create these spaces, we bet on ourselves because we know we deserve better in better spaces. And so that part is up to us. And so I'm rooting for all of you. But Laurie, I have enjoyed this so much. I hope everybody will get their copy here at Book Passages. And it's such a great book. And thank you again, Paula.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you both. That was amazing. I knew it was a magical pairing when Laurie came up with the name Minda Harts.
Of course. Well, Paula, thank you so much. And Minda, thank you as well.
Absolutely. And certainly by the audience interaction, they were fully engaged, and we had a lot of, in fact, I was getting like text messages from friends that were watching that had questions, and it's like, wow, we can't even get to all these questions. So we need another time. Truly, we do.
Well, let's do it when Minda's next book comes out.
Yes, that's a perfect, great suggestion. I love that. Yes, and as Laurie mentioned, you can certainly pre-order Minda's book, You Are More Than Magic, through Book Passage. And a little known fact, I think, to a lot of the audience, that it really helps authors a lot to get pre-orders on their books. Obviously, they're not going to turn away orders when the book is released, but the pre-orders really kind of give a signal to the publishers, like, oh, how much money should we put into promotion and marketing and touring and things like that when they start seeing those early numbers come in. So you know it's a book you want. You Are More Than the Magic, geared toward young women of color and Black girls. Let's just definitely support this, as well as Laurie's book, which I'm so glad is now available in paperback. So no excuse, it's accessible, it's affordable. It should just be on your bookshelf or at your office. And really appreciate all the insights and practical advice from both of you. Thank you so much. Audience members, get your books from Book Passage. We're available online, or you can give us a call. Any of our booksellers would be happy to help out, or come safely in person, San Francisco, Corte Madera. Until we see you again, be safe and healthy and keep reading.